Keep it, the billionaire said with a cold smile, sliding the $400,000 watch back toward the waitress. Most people wouldn't return it. Claire Whitmore looked at the gold Patek Philippe resting in her palm for one quiet second before placing it carefully on the white linen tablecloth beside his whiskey glass. That says more about your world than mine, Mr. Blackwell. The air around table 12 seemed to freeze. Even the soft piano music drifting through Blackwood Steakhouse suddenly felt distant beneath the weight of those words. Ethan Blackwell leaned back slowly in his chair, studying her for the first time that night, not as another invisible waitress moving through Manhattan's wealthiest dining room, but as a problem he couldn't immediately solve. Most women smiled too quickly around him. Most people talked too much. Most stared at his watch, his tailored charcoal suit, the private security near the entrance, or the black titanium card resting beside the check presenter. But Claire Whitmore had done something infinitely more dangerous. She had looked unimpressed. Outside, rain slid down the restaurant's floor-to-ceiling windows in silver lines, blurring the lights of Park Avenue into soft streaks of gold and white. Inside, crystal glasses clinked softly beneath chandeliers worth more than most American homes. And in the middle of it all stood Claire in a fitted black uniform with her blonde hair tied neatly behind her neck, calm as if she hadn't just embarrassed one of the richest men in New York without even raising her voice. Ethan swirled the ice in his whiskey once. You knew what that watch was worth. Claire adjusted the tray against her hip. Enough to know it belongs on your wrist instead of a restaurant bathroom sink. One of Ethan's friends laughed quietly from across the table. Jesus, Ethan. She shut you down fast. Another leaned closer, lowering his voice, but not enough. Told you she's smart. Probably waiting for a bigger opening. Claire heard it. Ethan knew she heard it. But she simply picked up the signed receipt folder and turned to leave. No reaction. No anger. No embarrassment. That bothered Ethan more than it should have. Wait. She stopped. Slowly. Yes, sir. Ethan glanced toward the watch again before looking back into her steady blue eyes. Most people would have sold it before sunrise. Claire's expression barely changed. Most people probably don't spend their nights serving men who think kindness is a trick. Silence. Heavy this time. Somewhere behind the bar, a glass shattered faintly, followed by nervous laughter. Ethan felt something unfamiliar crawl beneath his ribs. Not attraction. Not yet. Irritation. Curiosity. Maybe both. Claire gave a polite nod and walked away through the dining room, her steps calm against the marble floor while conversations quietly resumed around her. Ethan watched her disappear behind the kitchen doors, then loosened his tie slightly. You were right about one thing, his friend Marcus said, smirking as he lifted his bourbon. She's definitely not impressed by you. Ethan's jaw tightened faintly. Across the restaurant, he could still see Claire through the small kitchen window helping an elderly dishwasher carry a heavy tray toward the sink. No cameras around. No wealthy customers watching. No performance. Just quiet instinct. Ethan looked down at his watch again, then toward the hallway leading to the restroom where he had intentionally left it behind 15 minutes earlier. The first move in a game he had played dozens of times before. A test. A trap. Proof that everyone eventually revealed their price. But for the first time in years, Ethan Blackwell had the strange feeling that he might not be the one controlling the board anymore. By 10:30 that night, the rain had turned Manhattan into a city of reflections. Taxi lights stretched across wet pavement like melted gold, while cold wind curled through the narrow streets outside Blackwood Steakhouse. Inside the employee locker room, Claire Whitmore folded her black apron with careful hands and slid it into her worn canvas bag beside a paperback novel and a stack of unpaid envelopes she had not opened yet. Around her, the other waitresses moved through their routines with tired voices and exhausted smiles. You know he is coming back tomorrow, right? Mia asked while removing her earrings in front of the mirror. Claire glanced up slightly. Who? Mia laughed softly. Please. Ethan Blackwell. Men like that do not enjoy being challenged. Especially not publicly. Claire zipped her bag shut. I was not trying to challenge him. That is what made it worse. Mia shook her head. You acted like his money meant nothing. Claire pulled her coat tighter around herself before stepping toward the door. Because it does not. The room fell quiet for half a second. Not because anyone disagreed, but because nobody in Manhattan ever spoke like that anymore. Outside, the cold hit immediately. Claire crossed the street beneath the glow of a flickering pharmacy sign and walked 3 blocks downtown before stopping in front of a small brick building squeezed between a laundromat and a closed flower shop. The faded sign above the entrance read St. Mary Assisted Living Center. One light remained on inside the second-floor window. Claire smiled faintly. Mrs. Green was probably awake again. She pushed through the front doors carrying 2 paper bags filled with leftover dinner rolls and soup containers from the restaurant kitchen. The lobby smelled faintly of old books and peppermint tea. "Claire," an elderly voice called softly from the hallway. "That you, sweetheart?" "Go back to sleep, Mrs. Green," Claire answered gently while hanging her coat near the entrance. "You promised your doctor you would stop wandering around at night." An old woman with silver curls peeked around the corner anyway. "Doctors also said I should stop eating pie 15 years ago." Claire laughed quietly. "And yet somehow you survived." Upstairs, room by room, Claire moved through the building checking oxygen machines, replacing dead batteries in remote controls, and leaving small notes beside medication trays for the morning nurses. She was not paid to do any of it. Most nights, she simply stayed because the center was understaffed and slowly running out of money. At midnight, she finally entered room 23. Her mother was asleep beside the window, fragile beneath thin blankets while soft jazz played from an old radio on the nightstand. Claire adjusted the blanket gently around her shoulders before sitting down beside the bed. The city lights outside reflected in her tired blue eyes. Then her phone vibrated once. Unknown number. She stared at the screen for a moment before answering carefully. "Hello. You disappeared before dessert." Ethan Blackwell's voice was calm, smooth, controlled. Claire closed her eyes briefly. "How did you get this number?" "You filled out emergency contact paperwork for the restaurant 2 years ago. Blackwood Capital owns the building." "Of course it does," Claire thought silently. Men like Ethan always own more than they admitted. That is an abuse of privacy. Probably. He did not sound apologetic. "But now I know you answer unknown calls after midnight." Claire stood and quietly stepped into the hallway so she would not wake her mother. "What exactly do you want, Mr. Blackwell?" Silence lingered for one long second beneath the distant sound of traffic outside his end of the line. "I want to know why someone working double shifts in Manhattan returned a watch worth more than most apartments." Claire leaned against the wall. "Maybe because not everyone is for sale." Ethan gave a low laugh that held no amusement. "Everyone is for sale. The only difference is price." Down the hallway, an old clock ticked softly beside the nurse's station. Claire looked through the window at the sleeping residents inside their rooms. "That is a sad way to see people." "It is an accurate one." "No," Claire replied quietly. "It is just easier for you." The line went silent again. Ethan was not used to silence defeating him. In boardrooms, silence belonged to him. He controlled it, directed it, weaponized it. But with Claire, every pause somehow felt like she was the one holding power. Finally, he spoke again. "Dinner tomorrow night." Claire frowned slightly. "Excuse me. I want to see if your principals survive outside the restaurant." "And if they do?" Ethan looked out from the back seat of his black Rolls-Royce as it moved slowly through rain-soaked Manhattan streets. "Then maybe I misjudged you." Claire's eyes lowered toward the worn floor beneath her shoes. She could hear her mother coughing softly from inside. Room 23. Could hear the old pipes rattling in the walls again. St. Mary was dying slowly. Just like every place in the city that kindness could not monetize. "I am not interested in your games, Mr. Blackwell." "That is unfortunate," Ethan replied calmly. "Because I think you already stepped onto the board." Then the call ended. The next evening, Manhattan glittered beneath fresh rain like a city trying too hard to look untouchable. Black sedans rolled past glowing storefronts while steam curled from subway grates into the cold October air. Inside Blackwood Steakhouse, the dinner rush moved with polished precision. Servers crossed the marble floor carrying trays of wine and filet mignon while low jazz drifted beneath conversations about mergers, private equity, and vacation homes in Aspen. Claire Whitmore tied her apron carefully behind her back and avoided looking toward table 12 even though she already knew he was there. She had seen his driver outside 20 minutes earlier. Ethan Blackwell never arrived unnoticed. "Your billionaire is back," Mia whispered while refilling water glasses beside the service station. Claire kept organizing silverware. "He is not my billionaire. Tell that to the $6,000 tip he left last night." Claire finally looked up. "He left that?" Mia stared at her in disbelief. You did not even check the receipt? Claire reached into her apron pocket, pulled out the folded check presenter, and opened it for the first time. $6,000. Her breath caught faintly, not because of the number itself, but because she immediately thought about St. Mary. The broken elevator. Mrs. Green's medication. The heating bill due Friday morning. She closed the folder quickly. I cannot accept this. Claire, Mia said softly. That money could change somebody's month. Claire glanced toward the dining room, where Ethan sat alone beneath warm chandelier light, one hand resting beside a crystal whiskey glass while he reviewed something on his phone. Calm, sharp, completely unreadable. That is exactly why I cannot accept it. 10 minutes later, she approached his table carrying the black leather folder. Ethan looked up, slowly as she stopped beside him. His expression barely changed, but his eyes sharpened slightly. You came back. Claire placed the folder carefully beside his plate. Your tip is inappropriate. Ethan glanced at the receipt without touching it. So is returning a $400,000 watch. That was not generosity. That was basic decency. Interesting distinction. He leaned back slightly. Sit down. Claire blinked once. I am working. Then stand there and judge me professionally. Her lips almost moved into a smile before she stopped herself. Ethan noticed anyway. There it is, he said quietly. What? The expression you keep hiding every time you realize I am not entirely unbearable. Claire folded her hands calmly in front of her apron. Confidence sounds very similar to arrogance when you are rich enough. Ethan laughed softly under his breath. Real this time. Not the practiced social version people expected from powerful men. Around them, several diners subtly pretended not to stare. Keep the money, Claire. No, why? Because eventually you will expect something in return. Ethan's gaze held hers for a long moment. You think I buy people. I think you are used to people becoming whatever you pay them to become. Silence settled again between them. The piano player shifted songs near the bar, soft notes echoing through the restaurant like falling rain. Ethan slowly removed his watch and placed it on the table between them. Gold reflected beneath the chandelier light. How much do you think that costs? Claire did not look down. Enough to feed St. Mary Assisted Living Center for almost a year. Ethan's expression changed almost invisibly. Tiny. Dangerous. You mentioned that place last night. Claire immediately realized her mistake. Too personal. Too revealing. Ethan noticed the shift in her posture at once. So that is where you disappear every night. That is none of your business. Maybe not. He swirled the whiskey once. But I am beginning to think your business is more interesting than mine. Claire should have walked away then. She knew it. Men like Ethan Blackwell collected information the way other people collected. Watches. Quietly. Methodically. But before she could respond, the restaurant manager hurried toward them with visible panic written across his face. Claire, he whispered urgently, phone call. Emergency. Her stomach tightened instantly. She grabbed the cordless phone from his shaking hand. Hello. A tired female voice answered from St. Mary. Claire, I am sorry to bother you during work, but your mother collapsed during physical therapy. Everything around her went silent. The restaurant noise disappeared. The piano disappeared. Even Ethan's voice asking what happened sounded far away. Claire gripped the edge of the table to steady herself. Is she conscious? Yes. But the doctor says she needs additional treatment soon or things could get worse. Claire closed her eyes briefly. Treatment meant money. Money she did not have. She thanked the nurse quietly and lowered the phone with trembling fingers she immediately tried to hide. Ethan stood slowly from his chair. What happened? Nothing you can solve with a watch or a checkbook, Mr. Blackwell. Her voice stayed calm, but barely. Ethan studied her carefully. The controlled breathing. The pale expression. The way she straightened her shoulders before pain could fully show. He had seen that look before. People trying desperately not to fall apart in public. Claire reached for the receipt folder again and pushed it back toward him one final time. I cannot be part of your game. Then she turned and walked quickly toward the employee exit while rain hammered softly against the restaurant windows and Ethan Blackwell stood motionless beside table 12 watching the first person who had ever refused his money walk away from it twice. Rain hammered against the windshield as Claire drove through Manhattan in her aging Honda Civic with both hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. Red brake lights blurred across wet streets while ambulance sirens echoed somewhere downtown beneath the storm. Her mind replayed the nurse's words again and again. Additional treatment soon. Things could get worse. Every sentence sounded expensive. That was the cruelest part about illness in New York. Even fear came. With invoices. By the time she reached St. Mary Assisted Living Center, her shoes were soaked through and cold water clung to the hem of her black uniform pants. She pushed through the front doors breathlessly and immediately spotted Nurse Evelyn near the reception desk, holding a clipboard against her chest. "She is stable," Evelyn said softly before Claire could speak. Relief nearly buckled Claire's knees for one dangerous second. "Can I see her?" Evelyn nodded, but her expression stayed heavy. "The doctor is upstairs." Claire already understood what that meant. Room 23 was dim except for the soft glow of a bedside lamp. Her mother slept quietly beneath pale blankets while rain tapped gently against the window beside her bed. A heart monitor blinked slow green lights into the darkness. Claire stepped closer and brushed loose silver hair carefully away from her mother's face. Fragile. Smaller somehow. Illness always stole people in pieces first. Dr. Keller stood near the doorway with tired eyes behind thin glasses. "She pushed herself too hard during therapy today," he explained quietly. "Her heart is weaker than we expected." Claire folded her arms tightly across herself. "What happens now?" The doctor hesitated. Doctors always hesitated before saying things connected to money. "There is a specialized treatment program at Columbia Presbyterian. It could significantly improve her quality of life." Claire looked up immediately. "Could. Nothing is guaranteed." He lowered his voice slightly. "But without intervention, her condition will continue declining." Claire stared toward the rain-covered window. "How much?" Dr. Keller exhaled slowly. "After insurance?" "Around $180,000. The number landed silently inside her chest like a weight she physically could not carry. $180,000. Her entire world suddenly felt microscopic beside it. The diner shifts. The unpaid bills hidden in her kitchen drawer. The broken elevator downstairs. The old residents depending on donated blankets every winter. She thanked the doctor anyway because dignity often survived longest inside people who had the least left to lose. After he left, Claire sat beside her mother's bed holding her hand quietly while midnight crept across Manhattan outside. Her mother eventually opened tired blue eyes and smiled faintly. "You are still in your uniform," she whispered. Claire forced a small smile back. "Long night. You should not worry so much, sweetheart." Her mother's voice remained thin but warm. "I already had a beautiful life." Claire looked down quickly before emotion could fully reach her face. "Do not say that. Your father used to look exactly like that when he was scared." Claire laughed softly through the ache in her throat. "I am not scared." "Claire." Her mother squeezed her fingers weakly. "You have always been terrible at lying to people who love you." Silence filled the room gently after that. The kind of silence built from exhaustion instead of tension. Downstairs, an old radiator clanged somewhere in the building while thunder rolled across the city beyond the windows. Claire remained beside the bed until her mother finally drifted asleep again. Then she quietly stepped into the hallway and checked her phone for the first time in hours. 3 missed calls. Unknown number. She already knew who it was. A fourth call came almost immediately. Claire stared at the screen before finally answering with visible restraint in her voice. "What?" Ethan Blackwell sounded strangely calm. "You left before I could ask if your mother was all right." Claire leaned against the hallway wall beneath flickering lights. "You investigated me quickly." "I did not have to. You practically handed me clues. And rich men love solving mysteries." Ethan ignored that. "How bad is it?" Claire almost lied. Almost. But something about his voice tonight felt different. Less amused. Less performative. "The treatment costs $180,000. Silence. Not shocked silence. Calculating silence. Ethan finally spoke. "I can transfer that amount before sunrise." Claire closed her eyes immediately. Of course he could. Men like Ethan solve problems by signing papers. Moving numbers. Reshaping reality with money. "No, Claire." No, her voice sharpened this time. "I am not accepting charity. From a billionaire who treats human beings like investment experiments." Ethan stood alone inside his penthouse office overlooking Central Park while lightning flashed silently beyond 30-foot windows. "You think helping you would be manipulation. Would it not?" Ethan loosened his tie slowly. The city lights reflected across polished black marble floors around him. "Honestly." Claire waited. At first, probably. The honesty surprised her enough to create silence between them again. Ethan rested one hand against the glass window. But I have spent 2 days trying to understand why someone working double shifts in Manhattan still believes people can be decent. Claire looked down the empty hallway towards sleeping residents behind closed doors. And Ethan's voice lowered slightly. I think I am starting to realize how exhausting it must be carrying that belief alone. Claire swallowed carefully. Something about those words unsettled her more than arrogance ever had. Because for the first time since meeting Ethan Blackwell, he did not sound powerful. He sounded tired. The next morning arrived gray and cold over Manhattan, the kind of October morning that made the entire city feel exhausted before sunrise. Claire Whitmore stood outside St. Mary Assisted Living Center, holding a paper cup of coffee that had already gone cold in her hands while delivery trucks rumbled past puddles along the street. She had not slept. Every time she closed her eyes, numbers appeared behind them. $180,000. The amount echoed through her thoughts like a clock she could not stop hearing. Upstairs, her mother was stable for now. Stable was another dangerous word hospitals used when they wanted people to stay hopeful without making promises. Claire checked her phone again. 3 overdue notices. 2 emails from collection agencies. 1 final reminder from the city regarding St. Mary's property taxes. She slid the phone back into her coat pocket before the panic could settle fully into her chest. You cannot carry all this alone, sweetheart. Mrs. Green's voice came softly from the building entrance behind her. Claire turned quickly and forced a smile. The elderly woman stood wrapped in a knitted blanket despite the nurse clearly telling her not to leave the lobby. You should be inside. And you should stop pretending your eyes are not red from crying. Claire looked away toward the traffic. I was not crying. Mrs. Green smiled gently. You know, rich people are not always evil. Claire laughed quietly beneath her breath. That sounds suspiciously specific. That billionaire man called this morning. Claire froze. Slowly. What? Very polite voice. Terribly expensive manners. Mrs. Green adjusted the blanket around her shoulders. He asked if your mother liked tulips. Claire stared at her in disbelief. He called here. Twice, actually. The second time he asked whether your mother preferred tea or coffee. Claire pressed her fingers briefly against her forehead. Ethan Blackwell operated like a man who had never heard the word boundary in his life. Before she could respond, a black Rolls-Royce turned slowly onto the street and stopped directly in front of St. Mary. Of course it did. The driver stepped out first, holding an umbrella against the cold drizzle before opening the rear passenger door. Ethan emerged wearing a charcoal overcoat over a dark navy suit, one hand adjusting the leather gloves at his wrist while steam curled around him from the street vents below. Every movement looked expensive without trying to. Mrs. Green smiled brightly beside Claire. Oh dear, he is handsome, Claire whispered under her breath. Please do not encourage him. Ethan approached calmly beneath the umbrella while several residents near the lobby windows openly stared. Good morning, Claire. You cannot just appear here. Apparently I can. His eyes moved briefly toward Mrs. Green. You must be Eleanor Green. Mrs. Green immediately offered her hand. And you must be the billionaire causing my favorite waitress stress wrinkles. Ethan actually smiled faintly while shaking her hand carefully. I have been accused of worse. Claire folded her arms tightly. What are you doing here? Ethan looked toward the aging brick building behind her. Chipped paint, flickering lights, broken front railing held together, with temporary repairs. Seeing something I should have noticed a long time ago. Claire followed his gaze. St. Mary is not an investment opportunity. Everything is an investment opportunity. There it is, Claire said quietly. The real answer. Ethan studied her for one long moment while rain tapped softly against the umbrella overhead. You think money automatically corrupts intentions. Does it not? No, his voice remained calm. Power reveals intentions. Money just gives people the ability to act on them. Claire almost responded before stopping herself, because part of her hated that the sentence sounded honest. Ethan reached into his coat pocket slowly and handed her a sealed white envelope. Claire did not take it immediately. What is this? Open it. If this is a check, I am giving it back. Then open it so you can reject me properly. Mrs. Green chuckled softly beside them, while Claire reluctantly accepted the envelope. Inside was not a check. It was a contract proposal. Claire frowned as her eyes moved across the page. Blackwood Foundation Emergency Community Grant Initiative. Proposed partnership with St. Mary Assisted Living Center. Full building restoration. Medical equipment funding. Employee salary support. No repayment conditions. Claire looked up slowly. What is this? Ethan removed one glove carefully. A business arrangement. This is charity. No, Ethan shook his head once. Charity is temporary. This keeps the place alive. Claire stared at the papers again. The numbers alone looked unreal. Millions. More money than St. Mary had seen in decades. Why? She asked quietly. Ethan's expression shifted almost invisibly. Less guarded now. Because last night I realized something uncomfortable. What? He glanced toward the windows where elderly residents watched them curiously from inside the lobby. You were right. Claire blinked softly. Ethan Blackwell did not seem like a man who practiced those words often. About what? Ethan looked directly into her eyes while cold rain drifted quietly around them. I have spent so much of my life assuming everyone wanted something from me that I stopped asking what people actually needed. Silence settled between them again. But this silence felt different. Softer somehow. Less like a battlefield. Claire lowered her eyes toward the contract in her hands while her heartbeat slowly betrayed the calm expression on her face. Because for the first time since meeting Ethan Blackwell, she could no longer tell whether he was trying to win a game or become someone better. For the next 3 days, Ethan Blackwell did something that confused everyone around him. He kept showing up at St. Mary. Not with cameras. Not with reporters. Not with assistants carrying oversized donation checks for publicity photos. He simply arrived every afternoon in a dark overcoat carrying coffee for the nurses and quietly asking what needed fixing. By Thursday morning, the broken elevator finally worked again. Friday afternoon, new medical beds arrived for the second floor. Saturday, contractors replaced the flickering hallway lights that had buzzed for years like dying insects above tired residents. Claire watched all of it with growing suspicion she tried desperately not to show. Because people like Ethan did not change overnight. Men raised inside wealth learned generosity differently, usually when somebody important was watching. Yet every time she looked for performance in him, she found something strangely absent. No speeches, no self-congratulation, no dramatic gestures demanding gratitude, just quiet efficiency. That unsettled her more than arrogance ever had. You are staring again, Ethan said one afternoon while reviewing blueprints near the reception desk. Claire immediately looked away from him. I am supervising. You are suspicious. That too. Ethan almost smiled as he signed another approval form. Healthy skepticism is attractive on you. Claire folded her arms. And there is the billionaire ego again. I never claimed self-improvement was immediate. Mrs. Green laughed loudly from her wheelchair nearby. Oh, I like him. Claire sighed softly. Please stop encouraging him. But despite herself, she noticed things now. Small things. The way Ethan crouched to eye level when speaking to elderly residents instead of towering over them. The way he memorized nurses' names after hearing them once. The way he quietly replaced the old piano in the common room after learning it had not worked in 2 years. On Sunday evening, Claire walked downstairs after finishing her mother's medication schedule and froze near the lobby entrance. Soft piano music drifted through the building. Warm, elegant, familiar somehow. She followed the sound into the common room where several residents sat quietly listening beneath dim golden lights. Ethan Blackwell sat alone at the new piano in rolled-up dress shirt sleeves, his fingers moving carefully across the keys while rain tapped softly against the windows outside. Claire stared for a moment longer than she intended. Billionaires were not supposed to know Debussy. Ethan noticed her reflection in the piano's polished surface before the song ended. You look disappointed, he said quietly. Claire stepped further into the room. I was expecting stock market podcasts and yacht playlists. A few residents chuckled softly nearby. Ethan turned slightly on the piano bench. My mother played piano professionally before she died. The sentence landed differently than most things he said. Less polished. More human. Claire's expression softened before she could stop it. I did not know that. Most people do not ask questions that are not financially useful. Silence settled gently between them while the final piano notes faded into the room. Then Ethan looked toward the old residents listening nearby. Mrs. Green says you used to play too. Claire immediately shook her head. Mrs. Green exaggerates. Mrs. Green informed me you attended Juilliard before leaving school. Claire froze. Completely this time. Ethan realized instantly he had crossed a line. You investigated me again. His jaw tightened faintly. I was trying to understand you. No, her voice lowered. You were trying to explain me. The room grew quieter. Ethan stood slowly from the piano bench while residents subtly pretended not to notice tension gathering between them. Claire, do not. Her eyes flashed for the first time since meeting him. Not loud. Not dramatic. Worse. Controlled disappointment. You think because you pay for things, you are entitled to people's stories. Ethan held her gaze. That is not fair. No. Claire stepped closer. You walked into my life assuming everything had a price. Then when money stopped working, you started collecting information instead. Ethan looked away briefly toward the rain outside. Because part of him knew she was right. I am trying, he said quietly. Claire's expression softened for half a second before pain returned behind it. I know. Those two words hit harder than anger would have. Ethan watched her carefully. Then why do you still look at me like I am dangerous? Claire glanced toward the residents laughing softly around card tables beneath warm lights. Toward the repaired walls, the working elevator, the piano, the things Ethan had quietly saved. Because people with power rarely realize how easily they can destroy trust. Ethan stood completely still after that. No clever response. No billionaire confidence. Just silence. Real silence. Claire looked down at the piano keys beside him. I left Juilliard after my father died, she admitted quietly. Then I left Johns Hopkins 2 years later when my mother got sick. Ethan frowned slightly. You studied medicine? Physical rehabilitation. Her fingers brushed lightly across the piano edge. I was supposed to have a very different life. Ethan studied her face beneath the soft yellow light. The exhaustion she hid. The discipline. The quiet grief she carried with almost military precision. And suddenly something uncomfortable settled deep inside his chest. Respect. Not fascination. Not attraction alone. Something heavier. More dangerous. Because for the first time in years, Ethan Blackwell met someone he could not reduce into categories he understood. Claire finally stepped back from the piano. Thank you for helping St. Mary. Ethan looked at her carefully. That sounded almost sincere. One corner of her mouth lifted faintly. Do not ruin the moment. And for the first time since they met, Ethan laughed without armor around it. By the second week of November, St. Mary no longer looked forgotten. Fresh paint covered the old cracked walls. Warm lights glowed through. Repaired hallways instead of flickering weakly against peeling ceilings. New wheelchairs lined the medical wing, while soft piano music drifted through the common room every evening around 6 o'clock. The residents started smiling more. Nurses stopped whispering anxiously over unpaid invoices. Even the air inside the building somehow felt lighter. Claire noticed all of it. She also noticed something else. Ethan Blackwell kept showing up long after business hours ended. Sometimes he reviewed financial reports in the lobby while elderly residents argued over crossword puzzles nearby. Sometimes he sat beside Mrs. Green listening patiently to stories about her late husband for nearly an hour at a time. Once, Claire found him fixing a loose bookshelf himself while still wearing a $12,000 suit. There are people you could hire for that, she said from the doorway. Ethan glanced up briefly while tightening another screw. Apparently not fast enough. Claire stepped into the room carrying a tray of medication cups. You are impossible. That is the nicest thing you have ever said to me. She rolled her eyes softly, but the corner of her mouth betrayed her again. Ethan noticed. He always noticed now. That frightened her more than she wanted to admit. Because somewhere between the repaired elevator and late-night coffee conversations in the lobby, Ethan had stopped feeling like a billionaire testing her patience. He had started feeling dangerously human. That was harder to defend against. One Thursday evening, Claire finished helping Nurse Evelyn organize patient charts before finally sitting down beside the common room window with exhausted shoulders and cold coffee in her hands. Outside, snow drifted slowly through Manhattan for the first time that year. Quiet. Soft. The city looked gentler beneath snow, like even New York occasionally forgot how cruel it could be. Ethan entered the room, carrying 2 paper cups from the diner across the street. You looked like someone reconsidering every life choice she has ever made. Claire accepted 1 cup carefully. That is because I work 3 jobs and sleep 4 hours a night. Ethan sat across from her. You could stop. No, you could. Claire looked toward the snowfall outside. People like me do not get the luxury of stopping. Ethan studied her quietly. You still separate the world into people like you and people like me. Because the world does. Maybe the world is wrong. Claire almost laughed at that. Easy thing to say from a penthouse overlooking Central Park. Ethan lowered his eyes briefly toward the coffee cup in his hands. You know the strange thing about wealth? Claire waited. Eventually, everyone around you starts performing. His voice stayed calm, but something underneath it sounded tired again. Employees perform loyalty. Investors perform respect. Relationships perform affection. Snow collected softly against the windows while distant sirens echoed somewhere downtown. After a while, Ethan continued quietly. You stop knowing when people are real. Claire looked at him carefully now. Not the billionaire. Not the suit. Just the man beneath all the armor. And you think I am real? Ethan met her eyes directly. I think you are incapable of pretending. Silence settled between them, warm this time instead of sharp. Claire lowered her gaze first. Dangerous. This was becoming dangerous. Before either of them could speak again, loud laughter echoed suddenly from the lobby entrance. 3 men in expensive winter coats stepped inside, carrying champagne bottles and the careless confidence of people who had never been told no often enough. Ethan's expression hardened instantly. You did not tell us your charity project came with a beautiful administrator. One of the men joked loudly while removing snow from his coat sleeves. Claire recognized him immediately from financial magazines near the restaurant bar. Daniel Mercer, tech billionaire, Ethan's oldest friend. We were nearby after the investors' dinner. Daniel continued while glancing around St. Mary with amused disbelief. Figured we should finally see the miracle waitress everyone keeps hearing about. Claire stood slowly from her chair. Ethan's jaw tightened. Daniel. But Daniel was already smiling toward Claire. So tell me honestly, what was the strategy? Save the elderly first? Tug at Ethan's guilt? Because this place could make even a tax auditor emotional. The room went still. Completely still. Claire felt the words land quietly inside her chest, while several nurses nearby exchanged uncomfortable glances. Ethan stood immediately. Enough. Daniel raised both hands casually. Relax. I am complimenting her. Clearly the plan worked. Claire's fingers tightened slightly around her coffee cup, but her voice stayed calm when she answered. You think kindness is manipulation because that is the only language powerful men trust. Daniel smirked faintly. That sounds rehearsed. Ethan stepped forward now, cold enough to silence the room instantly. Apologize. Daniel blinked. Seriously? Now. Snow drifted quietly beyond the windows while tension spread through the common room like cracking ice. Daniel laughed awkwardly beneath Ethan's stare before finally shrugging. Fine. Sorry. But Claire already looked tired rather than angry. Tired in the way people looked when they realized dignity still had to defend itself in rooms full of money. She set the untouched coffee cup down carefully beside the window. Excuse me. Then she walked out of the room without another word while Ethan stood motionless watching the door close behind her and suddenly realizing that sometimes damage did not arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrived disguised as a joke spoken by someone who never learned the difference between wealth and worth. Claire avoided Ethan Blackwell for the next 2 days. Not dramatically, not emotionally. She simply became distant in the precise, controlled way intelligent people protected themselves when disappointment reached somewhere deeper than anger. She still thanked him politely when he brought supplies to St. Mary. Still updated him on her mother's treatment schedule. Still answered questions about the renovation budget with professional calm. But the warmth had vanished from her voice. And Ethan noticed immediately. By Monday evening, even the residents could feel the difference. Mrs. Green watched Ethan standing alone near the lobby coffee machine, while Claire reviewed patient files across the room without looking at him once. Oh, dear, she muttered softly into her tea. You broke the atmosphere. Ethan exhaled quietly beneath his breath. Apparently, that girl has spent her whole life being underestimated by men with money. Mrs. Green stirred sugar slowly into her cup. You cannot blame her for hearing the insult underneath the joke. Ethan looked toward Claire again. She stood near the nurse's station beneath warm overhead lights with tired eyes focused on paperwork, while snow drifted silently beyond the windows behind her. Calm, distant, untouchable again. Somehow that bothered him more than any argument could have. Because silence from Claire felt less like punishment and more like losing access to something honest. Later that night, Ethan found her alone in the common room adjusting sheet music beside the piano. The building was quiet except for the soft hum of old radiators and distant snowfall brushing against the windows outside. Claire sensed him before he spoke. You should really learn how to stop appearing everywhere. Ethan slid his hands into his coat pockets. I tried giving you space. And I hated it. Claire closed the piano lid carefully without responding. Ethan stepped closer slowly. Daniel was wrong. I know. No, his voice lowered. I mean, I should have stopped him before he even finished the sentence. Claire looked at him then. Really looked at him. Ethan Blackwell was many things. Arrogant sometimes. Overbearing often. But he was not pretending now. That was the dangerous part. Why does this bother you so much? She asked quietly. Ethan frowned slightly. Because he insulted you. People insult waitresses every day in Manhattan. You are not just a waitress. The words left his mouth too quickly. Claire's expression shifted instantly. Small. Sharp. There it is again. Ethan blinked. What? The part where you think dignity only exists if someone had potential for something bigger. Silence. Heavy this time. Claire stepped away from the piano slowly. Do you know what the residents here love most about St. Mary? Ethan watched her carefully. The piano? No. Her eyes softened slightly as she glanced toward the dark hallway upstairs. It is the feeling that nobody here has to prove they mattered once. Ethan stayed silent. Claire folded her arms gently across herself. A retired teacher lives upstairs who forgets her own name some mornings. A former firefighter cannot walk anymore without assistance. Mrs. Green repeats the same stories 3 times a day. Her voice remained calm. But inside this building, none of them are treated like they became less valuable because life changed. Snow continued falling softly outside, while Ethan absorbed every word in complete silence. Claire looked back toward him. You keep talking about potential, achievement, hidden talent, Juilliard, medicine. Her expression grew quieter now, sadder somehow. But what if being a waitress who takes care of sick people is already enough? Ethan felt something inside him shift painfully at those words. Because suddenly he understood the difference between helping Claire and understanding her. He had admired her intelligence because it fit into a world he respected. Degrees, talent, sacrifice. But Claire had never asked to be rescued into importance. She already believed she had it. Ethan lowered his eyes briefly toward the polished piano keys reflecting dim light across the room. I spent most of my life around people obsessed with becoming more, he admitted quietly. More successful, more powerful, more admired. Claire's expression softened despite herself. And Ethan looked up again. You are the first person I have ever met who makes ordinary kindness feel important enough. The room went still after that. No performance. No billionaire charm. Just truth sitting quietly between them beneath warm yellow lights and falling snow. Claire looked away first, her fingers brushing lightly against the edge of the piano. You really do not know how to say simple things simply, do you? Ethan almost smiled. Probably not. A faint laugh escaped her before she could stop it. Small. Real. Ethan noticed immediately. There you are. Claire shook her head softly. Do not get used to winning arguments. I am not trying to win anymore. That sentence lingered in the room longer than either expected. Claire looked toward him slowly. Ethan stood completely still beneath the soft light. Expensive suit slightly wrinkled for once. Exhaustion visible beneath his eyes after weeks of splitting time between billion-dollar meetings and St. Mary's quiet hallways. He suddenly looked less like a man controlling the world and more like someone trying to understand it for the first time. Claire's voice lowered almost to a whisper. Then what are you trying to do? Ethan answered honestly before fear or pride could stop him. Become someone you would not walk away from. Silence filled the room again, but this time it no longer felt cold. December arrived quietly over Manhattan. Snow settled along the sidewalks in soft white layers while Christmas lights reflected across wet streets like scattered gold beneath the evening traffic. Inside St. Mary Assisted Living Center, warmth finally lived in the walls again. The new heating system hummed steadily through every floor. Fresh garlands hung along the stair rails. Residents gathered nightly around the piano singing old songs while nurses laughed more easily than they had in years. Claire stood near the second-floor balcony watching everything below with tired but peaceful eyes. Her mother's treatment had begun 2 weeks earlier. Slowly, carefully, she was getting stronger. Some mornings, she even walked short distances without assistance now. Hope had returned to the building in small pieces. Quiet pieces. The kind that mattered most. You missed your own celebration. Ethan's voice came softly from behind her. Claire turned slightly and found him standing near the balcony doorway in a dark wool coat dusted with melting snow. Even after all these weeks, part of her still found his presence surreal against the faded halls of St. Mary. Billionaires belonged in glass towers and magazine covers, not carrying peppermint tea through nursing homes at 9 o'clock at night. I do not think this is my celebration, Claire replied gently. Ethan stepped beside her, overlooking the common room below where residents sat around the Christmas tree beneath warm yellow lights. The entire staff disagrees. Claire smiled faintly while watching Mrs. Green loudly defeat 2 nurses at bingo. Mrs. Green probably organized a petition. She absolutely did. Ethan rested one hand against the balcony rail. Silence settled comfortably between them now. No tension, no tests. Just 2 exhausted people standing inside a building that somehow changed both of them. Downstairs, soft piano music drifted upward through the halls while snow continued falling beyond the windows. Claire glanced sideways at Ethan after a moment. You look tired. He laughed quietly beneath his breath. I had 4 board meetings today, and yet you still came here. Ethan looked toward the residence below. This place feels more honest than most rooms I walk into. Claire studied him carefully. Over the past month, the sharp arrogance she first met inside Blackwood Steakhouse had softened around the edges, not disappeared entirely. Ethan Blackwell would probably always carry confidence like expensive cologne, but now there was something else beneath it. Humility, perhaps, or simply peace. Daniel came by my office yesterday, Ethan said suddenly. Claire raised an eyebrow slightly. Should I be worried? Probably. She laughed softly. Ethan's expression warmed faintly at the sound. He wanted to apologize. Claire looked surprised. That does not sound like your friend. No, Ethan smiled slightly. Apparently being thrown out of my penthouse Christmas party changed his perspective. Claire blinked. You threw him out. Technically, security escorted him out after he called St. Mary a publicity phase. Claire stared at him for one long second before shaking her head slowly. That was dramatic. I am a billionaire. We tend to specialize in dramatic. Her laughter came easier now. Natural. Ethan realized he had started measuring success by moments like that instead of stock prices. Dangerous realization for a man like him. Claire looked down toward the common room again, where her mother sat near the piano, smiling softly beneath Christmas lights. You changed a lot of lives here. Ethan's gaze followed hers. So did you. I was already here. Exactly. His voice lowered slightly. You stayed when nobody was watching. The words settled quietly between them, while snow drifted beyond the glass. Claire looked at him slowly. You know, she said softly, when I first met you, I thought you were the kind of man who only understood value if it came with numbers attached. Ethan nodded once. Fair assessment. But now, he waited. Claire's eyes softened faintly beneath the warm balcony lights. Now I think you were just lonely inside rooms full of people pretending to love you. Ethan looked away briefly after that because the sentence landed too close to truth. Downstairs, Mrs. Green suddenly shouted toward the balcony. If you two keep staring at each other like a Hallmark movie, at least come help decorate the cookies. Claire immediately laughed while Ethan shook his head beneath his breath. That woman is terrifying. That woman survived 3 husbands and 2 hip replacements. Fear is appropriate. Ethan glanced toward Claire again. Will you come to dinner with me tomorrow? Claire tilted her head slightly. Is this another billionaire strategy? No, his voice remained calm. Honest. Just dinner. Snow tapped softly against the windows while the piano downstairs shifted into silent night. Claire studied him for one long moment before finally nodding once. Small. Gentle. Enough. Ethan smiled slowly, not like a man who had won something, but like someone grateful trust had not entirely walked away from him after all. Downstairs, the residents continued singing softly beneath golden lights while Manhattan glittered cold and distant beyond St. Mary's windows. And standing there beside the waitress who never wanted his money, Ethan Blackwell realized the strangest thing of all. For the first time in years, he no longer felt rich because of what he owned. He felt rich because someone honest had finally seen the man beneath all the expensive armor and decided he was still worth staying for.